Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here at your conference. Actually, of course, I would love to be with you in Riga, because I've heard it's a very beautiful city, especially when it comes to Art Nouveau and Jugendstil, which I'm quite a fan of. But unfortunately, due to tight schedules, I can only be a part of this conference here thanks to Zoom. And nevertheless, I'm quite happy to give a short presentation from the perspective, well, of both Austria and Germany. Actually, at the moment, I'm rector of Ludwigsburg University of Public Administration and Finance in Germany. But not too much time ago, I was at the Federal Ministry of Education and Science in Austria, and therefore I can share some experience from the Central European perspective, especially German-speaking countries, on internal audit, especially. So, and the title of the presentation is "Good and the Role of Internal Audit." And just from your conference program, I can see that you have already, of course, stepped into the field of good governance paradigm, which is of importance when it comes also to the embeddedness of internal audit as a very important part of good governance and what we understand in this respect nowadays. So let me jump into the presentation. I mean, I guess aware of some of the most important good governance definitions. They come from the development economic perspective, or also, of course, from the macroeconomic perspective. From first stance, they really try also to give a good perspective on good governance of a state, of a whole nation in this respect, according at least to the World Bank. Where we can see good governance as a vital or central part in creating and sustaining an environment that fosters strong economic and social development. Very similar also the definition from the Monetary Fund, where we also see good governance as the basic or starting point for good economic policies, regulatory framework, and of course also the enforcement then especially of the rule of law. And United Nations, they maybe found the broadest concept of good governance, where we can also have a shorter or the deeper look inside shortly afterwards. Maybe something also to the background of the good governance paradigm, because I'm quite sure you're also aware that it's maybe the more enhanced or the broader concept shortly after the new public management movement. I mean, the new public management movement in the 80s and 90s just thought that by private sector management techniques and procedures, you would also improve public sector organizations. And it had something to do with sound and stable finance, accounting, managerial focus on organizational setup, also on processes and procedures, management control. But it just showed that maybe the new public management concept is more from an Anglo-American perspective, where you have a shorter interlink between public and private sector anyway, that this concept developed. But for some countries, especially also for Central European governments, where you have a strong focus on public law, this was not so easy to develop or to put in place. And therefore also for other countries, this was for some or other traditions quite difficult, and therefore the good governance paradigm really developed, which is a much broader perspective on also on more sectors, especially of societies. And as you can see from these definitions, especially also from United Nations definition that comes up with 8 characteristics of good governance, you can see that it's not only focusing with internal management procedures of public sector organizations or entities, but really it also gets into contact, of course, with the private sector, also with civil society, of course, So with all the sectors and really branches of a state or a nation, defining example given participation of the civil sector, civil society is a very important characteristic of good governance. So you have to somehow interfere, of course. You have to be open, responsive also to the public, to taxpayers, not only, but also to all the different stakeholders who have a stake in government procedures and activities. The rule of law is a very basic stepping stone once again, and not only the rule of law, but also the effective enforcement of the rule of law. Transparency is a very important issue. It comes together with participation, responsiveness to act upon citizens or stakeholders' needs, consensus orientation. So find the major parts of stakeholders in line with your political or also administrative procedures, activities, and performance goals, of course. Equity and inclusiveness is a very important aspect. But on the other side, also efficiency and effectiveness. And this is maybe really from the new public management era. It's one important aspect, of course, with all the interlinks into why the civil society and the private sector, of course, with internal procedures, don't forget about effectiveness and efficiency, because public sector administration, politics is about taxpayers' money, of course. So they are therefore, one always needs to be in terms with these two definitions, and also be accountable for what you do, not only in terms of finance, but also in terms of political aims and targets that you focus on. So these 8 basic stepping stones for a good governance within the United Nations definition, they maybe are also the starting point for the latest development, which is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And again, they are on a quite macroeconomic perspective, but certainly they have relevance to all public sector organizations in a country, in a state, and also they are applicable worldwide. So doesn't matter what is the public administration tradition, what is the history of all the different organizations or different cultures also, these sustainable development goals, they are applicable on a global basis. So they are really also focused on, or they are also based on the 8 characteristics that you have seen before. Just example given inclusiveness, you will find nearly in all these sustainable development goals, because no poverty, zero hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, also access to resources, to democratic participation. This has to do something, of course, with the characteristics mentioned before, inclusiveness, participation, having major stakeholders and the majority of civil society behind political goals. So know that you act just in response to the needs of citizens and of course also of the private sector of companies. So this is maybe a short look into the broader perspective of good governance from the whole state perspective, or from the macroeconomic perspective. But of course, we can also drill down into public sector organizations as such. So it doesn't matter whether this is a public sector business entity, or whether this is more like a bureaucratic organization like a ministry, local government. IFAC and SIPFA, and you know these institutions that they come from an accounting perspective, therefore also of course have a strong focus on good finance, good financial management. They came up with this nice framework of defining good governance in the public sector, and you can see from the core of this framework that everything really starts with a strong commitment to ethical values. and respect to the rule of law. So therefore, this is something like the attitude behind good governance. This means really we follow strong ethical values with an attitude of integrity. And this is really basic. So without that attitude that we act for citizens, example given, that we act in safeguarding the best use of taxpayers' money, that we act, of course, according to the rule of law. This is actually the most important, really, to start with good governance. And then, of course, also ensuring the openness and comprehensive stakeholder engagement. So this means, again, we have to be open for the needs. We also have to bring into participation, responsiveness to citizens' needs, to the needs of private sector enterprises, and so on and so forth. So this is really also from a strong financial management perspective. This is really the starting point. And then with the other fields, you can see how the framework is developed, defining outcomes in terms of sustainable economic, social, and environmental benefits. So outcome orientation, because I've seen from the program that after my presentation, you will also turn into performance audits. And to define performance, of course, at first you need to set outcome goals, outcome definitions. What do you want to achieve in respect to sustainable economic, social, and environmental benefits? Then also, of course, determining the interventions necessary to optimize the achievement of the intended outcomes. So then you have to bring into place, of course, proper organizational setup, procedures, resources, and so on and so forth, also to come up with some targets to these outcomes, or also to achieve these outcomes. That then means you then only enter the field of the entity's internal capacities. So get into capacities including capability of leadership and individuals. So this has to do something with human resource development, but of course also all the other resources that you need in the entity to achieve outcomes. Or just to get your targets right? And then when these things are clear, then of course we also turn into the perspective of management risk and performance through robust internal control and strong public financial management. So this now is really the field of internal accountants, sound financial management, and of course also risk management. And this is very strong, of course, from the perspective of accountants, financial management. We here turn into internal controls, especially. Of course, also for the final point, also to make sure that you come up with results towards your outcome definitions right at the beginning. Also the implementation of good practices in transparency is important, reporting, auditing to deliver effective accountability. Okay, so but the whole framework that you can see, this is the definition of good governance, and this is also where internal audit steps in. So internal audit really is about the whole framework as such, whilst you can also see internal control and special management procedures. They are just only, well, not to underestimate their role, but they are only one aspect of this. And what I mean with this maybe is a bit clearer also from the next perspective or from the next slide, where there is the difference a bit between internal audit and internal control. So whilst internal audit really is means strategic management for good governance, internal control is much more like management procedures. So it's the operationalization, sorry for this, of certain management procedures that make sure that management comes up with precise or good results, but it also finds this in an effective and efficient way. It's a reliability towards financial results, and of course also compliance. So this is the world of internal control. Whilst internal audit really has, well, not to be underestimated role in strategic management, and therefore also support towards the board of directors of a special organization, and is also in a strong interlink with external auditors, of course, too. Because what does internal audit really do? It helps the organization to attain its goals by using specific methodologies to estimate and upsurge the efficiency of governance, control, and risk management. So internal audit, by its activities, by using its methodologies, really supports the whole organization on the board of directors of the organization or the minister or whoever it is, by finding the right policies and the right approach to come up with the best organizational setup as such, the best use of resources, but also then, of course, with defining good outcome goals and getting the results at the end of the day to these outcome definitions. Okay? So therefore, of course, it's good to have both. It's also very important to have sound procedures for internal control. But internal audit is really the broader perspective, and it's in the field of strategic management and governance as such, whilst internal control is rather in the field of management procedures to safeguard that really everything is done in the precise and accurate way as it should be done. Okay, so you can see the very importance or the importance of internal audit, especially also when you have a look at internal audit types, because also these, of course, have developed over the last years, and also their application, of course, in most countries has only developed, because everything maybe started more or less with the financial audit perspective, like safeguarding compliance, safeguarding that finances, financial resources are used in the most compliant way. And compliance here, of course, means to public law regulations. But over the years, besides compliance and operational audit, of course, also more audit types have developed, where you can also see the strategic perspective that internal audit nowadays is of course, finding, or more, it's finding the role in this strategic perspective, like information system audit, of course, with more use of ICT nowadays in the public sector, which is costly. It takes quite a long time to get into place proper ICT management systems. Also, the audit for this special function is, of course, necessary. So ensure proper functioning of information systems. Make sure that they support the organizational perspectives. Also the type of organization, that they support the best service provision in their respect, and of course, again, efficiency, effectiveness of these systems. This is always, of course, part of it. Performance audit. This is something very important. Because only with performance audits, also the strategic perspective comes to its best that internal audit has with it. Like supporting a minister, executive board with coming up with good outcome definitions, defining targets, defining also procedures, processes, or supporting in the right definition of these measures is really the best way to supporting organizational success, so to say. And just after me, as I already mentioned, several further presentations will step into the field of performance audit, also methodologies of performance audit. This is still something like the best public management discipline approach, also like performance audits and performance budgeting, because it's quite difficult and quite tricky. But at the other side, if we somehow get a good approach towards these perspectives, really outcome orientation, defining good outcomes, and then having the organizational setup with good processes, efficient and effective resource input, and then coming up with results that have something to do with the defined outcomes at the first stance, then we can really say that we are in the field of good governance for a certain function or for a certain organization. So therefore, this is really important. And of course, nowadays, environmental audit certainly is also a very, very important perspective. Also good finance to support environment, procurement to support environmental targets and goals, and no need to talk about this special aspect just in the recent political situation that we are facing in the European Union due to the very, very, very sad war between Ukraine and Russia, and also the results that this has, or the effects this has on the environmental or energy situation in Europe at the moment, right? So therefore, but the environmental perspective also developed long ago, and just at the moment we see how important it is to really have a sharp look on these developments in time, and not only really in a moment when we are in a crisis situation, that we realize how important this is, right? So, of course, also a very important a point of internal audit is all special assignments, like investigation on fraud and corruption, or any other special subject that a board of executives or a minister or whoever is the head of an organization really also addresses to internal audit. And I would say these special assignments, they are maybe the part where most people of an organization are most afraid of internal audit, because this is where somehow also the starting point was. I mean, in times when I entered the public service in Austria, the federal public service, in my ministry, in those days, the internal auditor was somebody who checked upon proper procurement. I mean, it was in those days a totally different role. It was not anything that had something to do with what we are talking today, with a strategic perspective, supporting the executive branch really of an organization, the minister supporting the executive board in a public sector company. Okay, so it was really somebody who checked upon proper treatment, whether resources were put into the right place. And colleagues of that person always had the impression, well, that's the guy who is somehow, well, we don't know, he's controlling us, he's reporting to somebody we don't know, we have no idea what kind of reporting he does, and whether this has something to do with disciplinary measures then for us or not. But still, special assignments, of course, with a proper transparency, and if proper, first of all, communicated, and then, but also reported towards people who are in the focus of it, is something different than the situation that I just lined out to you, that I faced when I entered the public sector 15 years ago, I would say. So you see the tremendous development that really the role of internal audit has made in these days, also in Austria, of course, because nowadays I can say for sure, at least from my perspective, from as being a member, or now former member of the public Ministry of Education, Science and Research, in my ministry, so allow me, although I'm now the rector of another university, in my ministry, internal audit was really a very, very important partner also to get management techniques right, to get all these things that I pointed out before. And just allow me also to switch to the other slide, to support management, to support executive, to get all these, what is here said, management procedures on risk management, on proper processes, on outcome definition, on finding measures how to then also tackle the issues, how you can measure really outcome fulfillment. Internal audit had really a very important perspective, on that dimension. And so, yeah, this is where I wanted to go. And therefore, this is something where you can, of course, also see the development of that role, once again, from maybe the spy within the organization itself to a fair partner of executive management in bringing up the best results of an organization that you could basically get. So thank you very much for your attention. This is actually my contribution to today's conference. I'm quite happy if there are some questions that I can answer just now afterwards. And otherwise, you can find my email address. If you are interested in contacting me, just do it anytime you wish. And good luck for also your conference, and of course all the other activities that follow afterwards in your internal audit